John lived in a small, quiet neighborhood where everyone knew each other. His house was simple but neat, with a small garden in front and a few flowers blooming in the sunlight. John liked to keep things peaceful. He enjoyed reading books, drinking his morning coffee on the porch, and watching the birds fly around. Life was calm, and John was happy with this calmness. Karen lived just 2 houses away. She was loud and always seemed upset about something. People in the neighborhood often heard her shouting or complaining, and sometimes her voice carried down the street. Some neighbors avoided talking to her because she could be quick to anger. John had tried to be friendly to Karen before, but she never smiled back. Instead, she often made sharp comments about his garden, his parking, or even the way he spoke. It made John feel uneasy, but he tried to ignore it. One warm afternoon, the sun was shining bright and the sky was clear blue. John had just finished mowing his lawn and was putting away his tools. He was feeling proud because the grass looked very nice. He wanted everything to look perfect in his small world. That's when he noticed Karen's car parked near his driveway. It was a little too close, blocking part of the road. John thought to himself, that's not very nice. She always parks so carelessly. John didn't say anything at first. He hoped Karen would move the car soon. But as minutes passed, Karen came outside. She was holding her phone and talking loudly. She seemed angry already. Looked straight at John and walked toward him. "What do you think you're doing?" Karen shouted. Her voice was sharp and loud, making John stop in his tracks. John blinked in surprise. Wasn't doing anything. "I was just fixing my garden," he said quietly, trying to stay calm. Karen didn't listen. "Your garden? Your garden? Your lawnmower woke up my dog, and now he won't stop barking. You don't care about anyone but yourself." She took a few steps closer, her face red with anger. John felt his heart beat faster. He didn't want to argue. He just wanted peace. "I'm sorry if your dog is upset.
Sorry.
I didn't mean to cause trouble." Karen didn't seem to want to calm down. Instead, she raised her voice even more. "Sorry is not enough. You should be more careful. You always think you're better than everyone else." Some neighbors had heard the shouting and looked out their windows. A few people came closer, curious about what was happening. John felt his face get hot. He didn't like being the center of attention like this. He tried again to explain. "Karen, I'm just trying to enjoy my afternoon. Please, let's not fight." But Karen was not ready to listen. She started yelling louder and louder. "You think you're so perfect. You park your car wrong, you block the road, and you don't care about anyone?" John was confused. He looked around and saw that Karen's car was actually parked too close to his driveway. "Karen, your car is blocking my driveway. Can you please move it?" Instead of calming down, Karen's eyes grew wider, and she screamed, "How dare you tell me what to do? I've lived here longer than you. This is my street too." The neighbors were now watching closely. Some shook their heads, some whispered. The peaceful afternoon had turned into a scene of shouting and anger. John's hands started to shake. He didn't want to yell back, but inside he was feeling a storm of emotions. He was hurt by her words and angry because he felt unfairly treated. Karen kept screaming, making faces, and pointing her finger at John. The more she shouted, the more John wanted to find a way out. But the words kept coming, loud and sharp. At one moment, Karen shouted something that surprised John. "You don't belong here. You're not welcome." That was like a slap to John's heart. He had lived in this neighborhood for years. It had never caused problems before. Now this woman was telling him he was not welcome in his own home. John felt tears start to come. He wanted to say something strong, but his throat was tight. He looked around at the neighbors and saw some of them watching, some looking sad. He felt very alone in that moment. Then, a voice came from behind. It was Mrs. Lewis, an elderly woman who lived across the street. She called out, "Karen, please stop. This is not the way neighbors should talk." Karen turned to Mrs. Lewis, but didn't listen. Instead, she waved her hand and said, "Stay out of this. It's between me and him." John took a deep breath and said quietly, "Karen, this fight isn't helping anyone. Please, let's calm down." Karen laughed bitterly. "Calm down? Why should I calm down? He needs to learn his place." John didn't know what to say. He wanted to explain, to make her understand, but the angry look in her eyes told him it was useless. After a few more minutes of shouting, Karen suddenly stopped. She looked around, as if noticing the crowd for the first time. Then, she stomped toward her car, slammed the door, and drove away quickly. John watched her go, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. The quiet street was still noisy with neighbors. Talking about what had happened, John went back inside his house, closed the door softly, and sat down. His hands were still shaking. Thought about the fight and the words that were said. He wondered why things had gotten so bad. He knew Karen had a hard life, and maybe that was why she was angry all the time. But he also knew he couldn't live in fear of her next outburst. Something had to change. John looked out the window and saw Karen's car parked again, just a little way down the street. He hoped this was the last fight they would have. But deep down he worried it might only get worse. That night, John couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the afternoon. Ow! Quickly, a small problem became a big argument. How someone's anger could fill the whole street and make everyone uncomfortable. He thought about how important it was to stay calm, even when others shouted. But he also knew it was hard when someone was so angry and loud. John decided he would try to be patient and kind. He would try to understand Karen better, even if she was difficult. But he also knew he had to protect himself and his peace. The next morning, the neighborhood was quiet again. People acted like nothing happened. But John knew that things between him and Karen had changed forever. That day was the start of something. Knew a test of patience, understanding, and the limits of calm. John took a deep breath and went outside to water his flowers. The sun was shining again. He hoped that one day the noise and anger would end and peace would return. The next few days after the shouting match were tense and uncomfortable for John. Every time he stepped outside, he felt like Karen's angry words were still hanging in the air. The neighbors whispered quietly to each other when they saw him. Some looked at him with sympathy, while others seemed to judge him silently. John wished things could go back to normal, but he knew deep down that the situation with Karen was far from over. One afternoon, John was sitting on his porch reading a book when he noticed something strange. Karen's car was parked unusually, close to his driveway again. This time, it was even closer than before, blocking his way out. John frowned. He had been careful not to block her space or cause any problems. But it seemed like Karen was not interested in peace. John stood up and walked slowly toward the car. He wanted to leave for a short walk, but the car made it impossible. He knocked on Karen's door softly, hoping she would answer and move the car, but there was no reply. The house was quiet. John felt a mix of frustration and worry. He didn't want to cause trouble, but he also needed to get out. He looked around and saw a few neighbors watching from their windows. Some shook their heads and others whispered. The tension in the street was rising again. After waiting for a while, John decided to try his phone. He called Karen's number, but it went straight to voicemail. He left a polite message, asking her to move the car because he needed to go out. Then he waited, hoping she would come soon. Minutes passed, and there was still no sign of Karen. John looked at the car and noticed something unusual. A small wisp of smoke was coming from under the hood. At first, he thought it was just steam because of the hot weather. But the smoke grew thicker, and soon it looked like a fire was starting. John's heart raced. He had never seen a car catch fire before. Panic filled his chest. He quickly ran to get his phone and dialed the emergency number. While waiting for help, he tried to see if he could open the car's hood to stop the fire, but the hood was locked tightly. John looked around and saw a few neighbors gathering, pointing at the smoke and talking loudly. The calm street had turned into a scene of worry and confusion. John felt responsible. He wished Karen was here to help, but she was nowhere to be seen. The fire grew faster. Flames started coming out from under the hood. John stepped back quickly, afraid the fire might spread to nearby trees or houses. He told the neighbors to stay away for their safety. Within minutes, the fire department arrived. The firefighters jumped out of their truck with hoses and equipment. They moved quickly to put out the fire before it could do more damage. John watched nervously, feeling both relief and fear. As the firefighters worked, John thought about what had just happened. How did the fire start? Was it an accident or something else? He remembered the shouting match from a few days ago and wondered if this was somehow connected. After the fire was out, the firefighters said the car was badly damaged. The engine and some parts under the hood were burned. The car might not be safe to drive anymore. John felt a heavy weight on his chest. He never wanted to see something like this happen. Karen finally came outside. She looked shocked and angry when she saw the damage. Her face turned red as she yelled at John. "This is your fault. You left my car like this. How could you?" John tried to explain Karen. "I didn't do anything. I just saw the fire and called for help." But Karen was too upset to listen. She kept blaming him loudly. Some neighbors were shocked by how angry she was. Others tried to calm her down, but she refused. Soon, the police arrived. They had been called by one of the neighbors who heard the yelling. The officers spoke to John and Karen separately to understand what happened. John told the truth. He did not start the fire. He only noticed it and called for help. Karen, on the other hand, said John was careless and had caused the fire. He said he was angry with her and wanted to hurt her. The police had to decide what to do next. They looked at the burned car and the scene carefully. They asked neighbors if they saw anything unusual. Some people said they heard shouting before the fire, but no one saw who caused it. John was worried. He knew this was serious. If the police believed Karen, he could be in big trouble. He hoped the truth would come out, but he was also afraid of what might happen. The news about the fire spread quickly in the neighborhood. People talked about it in hushed voices. Some said John was dangerous. Others thought Karen was being unfair. The quiet street had changed. The tension between John and Karen had become a problem for everyone. John tried to keep calm. He spent hours thinking about what to do next. He knew he had to be careful with his words and actions. One wrong step could make things worse. Meanwhile, Karen stayed angry and distant. She avoided talking to John and the neighbors. Her shouting stopped for a while, but the cold silence between her and John was worse. John felt lonely and misunderstood. He wanted peace, but everything seemed to push him into more trouble. He wished he could fix things, but he didn't know how. One day, John received a letter from the police. They wanted to talk to him again about the fire. John was nervous. He hoped this meeting would clear things up. At the police station, John explained everything again. He told them how the car was parked blocking his driveway, how he called for help when he saw the fire, and how he had no reason to cause harm. The officers listened carefully. They told John they were still investigating. They asked if he had any proof or witnesses. John thought about the neighbors who saw the fire and the shouting. Maybe they could help. After the meeting, John felt a little better. He was doing his best to be honest and patient, but the fear of being blamed was still there. Days turned into weeks. John learned that the police were checking everything carefully. They talked to neighbors, firefighters, and Karen. Slowly, the truth began to come out. Some neighbors said they saw smoke coming from the engine before John called the fire department. Others confirmed that Karen was not home when the fire started. No one saw John doing anything wrong. John felt relief. It seemed like the police were understanding his side. But the damage to the car and the angry feelings between him and Karen remained. John also thought about how much the fight had changed his life. The peace he once enjoyed was gone. Every day felt harder. He wanted to find a way to live without fear and anger. One evening, John sat on his porch watching the sunset. The sky was orange and pink. He hoped that one day things between him and Karen would be better. He wished for kindness and calm to return to the neighborhood. But for now, John knew he had to be strong and careful, had to face the consequences and learn from the difficult days. The days after the fire were difficult for John. The neighbors looked at him differently now. Some avoided him, while others whispered about what had happened. John felt like he was walking on thin ice. Every small mistake could make the situation worse. He missed the peaceful life he once had. The quiet mornings, the friendly nods from neighbors, the calm walks in the street all seemed far away now. Karen did not speak to John anymore. She stayed inside her house most of the time, and when she came outside, her face looked cold and angry. John wondered if she blamed him for the fire. Maybe she did, even though he had not started it. But no one knew the full story, and rumors spread fast in the neighborhood. One afternoon, John received a visit from a lawyer. The lawyer said that Karen had filed a complaint against John for property damage and reckless behavior. The complaint said that John had caused the fire on purpose. John felt shocked and scared. He knew he had not done anything wrong, but now he had to prove it in front of a judge. John listened carefully as the lawyer explained what might happen next. There would be court hearings, questions from lawyers, and possibly a trial. John didn't like the thought of standing in front of strangers and telling his story. But he also knew he had to fight to protect himself. The lawyer told John to gather anything that could help his case. Pictures of the car before the fire, statements from neighbors who saw what happened, and reports from the fire department. John started working hard to collect this information. He visited neighbors and asked if they could write down what they saw. Some agreed, but others were afraid to get involved. John also met with the fire chief. The chief explained that the fire was likely caused by a mechanical problem in the car, not by human action. The report from the fire department would help John's case. It showed no evidence that John had started the fire intentionally. Despite the support, John felt lonely. His days were filled with worry and stress. He stopped going to the park or the local store. As often, he felt eyes on him everywhere he went. The neighbors' whispers hurt him, even though some still believed in his innocence. At home, John tried to stay calm. He kept his routine, watering the plants and reading books. But inside, he was restless. Sometimes he wondered if things would ever get better. The fight with Karen had changed everything. Karen, on the other hand, seemed determined to keep the conflict alive. She talked to neighbors about John, telling her version of the story. Some believed her angry words. She said John was dangerous and should be punished. This made John's situation harder. One day, John saw Karen talking to a group of neighbors. Outside her house, they looked serious. John wanted to approach and explain again, but he was afraid the conversation would end badly. So he stayed inside, watching from his window. John's heart ached. He wanted peace and friendship, but did not know how to get it. The neighborhood, which was once his home, now felt like a place full of tension and fear. Then, something unexpected happened. A few neighbors decided to speak up for John. Mrs. Garcia, who lived next door, wrote a letter to the community. She said she had known John for years, and he was a kind and peaceful man. She told how she saw him call the fire department when the car caught fire. Mrs. Garcia asked others to give John a chance and not judge him unfairly. Other neighbors joined Mrs. Garcia's call for fairness. They shared their thoughts in meetings and community chats. Slowly, more people began to understand John's side of the story. It was not easy, but some walls started to come down. John felt grateful for the support. It gave him hope that the neighborhood could heal. He wanted to reach out to Karen, but he was not sure if she was ready to listen. Meanwhile, the court date approached. John prepared to tell his story honestly. He practiced speaking clearly and calmly. He wanted the judge to know that he had never wanted to cause harm and that the fire was an accident. On the day of the hearing, John wore his best clothes and arrived early. The courtroom was quiet and serious. Karen was there too, looking tense and upset. John felt nervous but remembered to breathe deeply. The judge listened carefully to both sides. John spoke truthfully about what had happened. He shared the support letters from neighbors and the fire chief's report. Karen explained why she was angry and hurt, but she also admitted she did not know exactly how the fire started. After hearing all the information, the judge made a decision. John was not guilty of starting the fire on purpose. The court said the fire was an accident caused by the car's problem. John was relieved, but also sad that the fight had brought so much pain. Judge also asked both John and Karen to try to find peace for the sake of the neighborhood. He suggested they attend a mediation meeting where they could talk with a neutral person and work toward understanding each other better. John thought about the judge's words. He wanted to move forward and heal the wounds, but he knew it would take time and patience. After the court, John started thinking about how to rebuild his life. He decided to focus on kindness and calm, even when things were hard. He began volunteering at the local community center, hoping to meet new friends and bring positive change. Slowly, John noticed the neighborhood becoming quieter again. People smiled more and spoke less about the fire. The street where he lived started to feel like home once more. Although John and Karen did not become friends, their relationship grew less tense. They nodded politely when they met, and the shouting stopped. The hard days were behind them, replaced by a cautious peace. John understood that sometimes people's anger can lead to serious problems, but he also learned that honesty, patience, and support from others can help heal even the deepest wounds. As the sun set on the quiet street, John felt hopeful. He knew life would bring challenges, but he was ready to face them with calm and kindness. After the court hearing, John felt a mix of relief and responsibility. He was glad that the judge believed his story and saw that the fire was an accident. But he also knew the fight with Karen had left deep marks on both of them and the whole neighborhood. He wanted to make things better, not just for himself, but for everyone around him. John remembered what the judge had said about mediation away, to talk calmly with Karen and find some understanding. At first, John was nervous about this idea. He wondered how he could sit down with Karen after everything that happened. But he also saw it as a chance to heal and maybe stop the tension between them. One day, John agreed to meet with a mediator, a kind and patient woman named Ms. Harper. She was trained to help people talk when they had problems. The meeting was held in a small room at the community center, a place John had visited before during his volunteer work. Karen arrived a few minutes later, looking serious but not angry. The two of them sat across from each other with Ms. Harper. Between them, the room was quiet, except for the soft voice of the mediator. Ms. Harper started by explaining the purpose of the meeting. She said this was a safe space where both could speak honestly without fear. She asked John and Karen to listen to each other and try to understand how the other felt. John took a deep breath and spoke first. He told Karen how the shouting and anger had hurt him. He said he wanted to live in a peaceful neighborhood where people respected each other. He admitted that he had made mistakes but hoped they could find a way to move forward. Karen looked at John and nodded slowly. Then she shared her feelings. She said she had been angry because she felt threatened and disrespected. She explained that her life was difficult and sometimes her anger came out in the wrong ways. She apologized for yelling and said she wished things were different. The two talked carefully, and Ms. Harper guided them to focus on understanding rather than blame. John and Karen found that they had more in common than they thought. Both wanted safety, respect, and calm in their lives. By the end of the meeting, John and Karen agreed to try to be kinder and more patient with each other. They promised to avoid shouting and to talk calmly if problems came up. It was not a big friendship yet, but it was a start. After mediation, John felt lighter. The tension he had carried for so long seemed to lift a little. He looked forward to seeing Karen without fear or anger. For her part, Karen seemed more relaxed when she passed by John's house. The neighborhood noticed the change too. The quiet streets were peaceful again, and people smiled more. John felt happy that the community could heal, even after the fire and the fights. John also kept working on himself. He joined a group at the community center that helped people manage anger and stress. He learned new ways to stay calm and solve problems without shouting. He found that patience was a skill that anyone could learn. Karen, meanwhile, started attending counseling sessions to deal with her anger. She realized that her shouting was hurting not only others, but also herself. She wanted to be a better neighbor and friend. One day, John and Karen met outside while watering their gardens. They stopped and talked for a few minutes about the flowers and the weather. The conversation was simple but kind. It felt like the old days before the fire. And fights, John thought about how far they had come. The anger and pain were still there sometimes, but they no longer controlled their lives. They had learned to respect each other and find peace. The experience taught John many lessons. He understood that anger could quickly lead to damage, sometimes to things, sometimes to people's hearts. But he also learned that forgiveness and Understanding could heal wounds if people were willing. John's friends and family noticed the change in him too. He seemed more peaceful and hopeful. He smiled more and spoke softly about the future. The neighborhood was different now. It was not perfect, but it was better. People had learned to listen, to be patient, and to help each other. John hoped that other conflicts could be solved like this with kindness and care. He wanted his story to remind people that no matter how hard life gets, there is always a way to find peace. As the days passed, John and Karen continued to live side by side. They did not need to be best friends, but they respected each other's space and feelings. John watered his flowers every morning, thinking about how important it was to nurture not just plants but also relationships. He smiled, feeling calm inside. The neighborhood was quiet and safe once more. The fire that had scared them all was now just a memory, a reminder of how important it was to choose kindness over anger. John knew that life would bring new challenges, but he was ready. He had learned how to face them with patience, respect, and hope. Time passed slowly but surely, and the neighborhood began to feel like home again. The echoes of the fire and the angry shouting faded little by little. John woke each morning to the gentle sounds of birds singing and the soft rustle of leaves. In the breeze, his garden blossomed with bright flowers, and the sun warmed the porch where he liked to sit and think. Life was calmer now. But John never forgot the lessons he had learned during the hardest days. Even though the tension between John and Karen had lessened, they were still cautious around each other. They did not talk much, but when their paths crossed, they greeted each other politely. The silence was peaceful, not cold or full of anger anymore. It was a sign that things were slowly healing. One afternoon, John was working in his garden when Karen came outside with a small basket of freshly picked vegetables. She walked carefully to John's porch and smiled gently. "I thought you might like some," she said, offering the basket. John looked surprised but pleased. "Thank you, Karen. That's very kind of you." Karen nodded and said softly, "I'm sorry for all the trouble before. I want to be a better neighbor." John smiled warmly. "I'm sorry too. We both made mistakes, but I'm glad things are better now." The two shared a quiet moment, understanding that healing takes time, but is always possible when people are willing. As the weeks went by, John and Karen began to share more small moments like this. Sometimes they talked about the weather, the garden, or the neighborhood news. They found simple joys in the little things that once seemed too small to notice. John also continued to volunteer at the community center, helping others learn how to manage stress and anger. He shared his story quietly with those who wanted to listen, hoping it would inspire them to choose kindness and patience in difficult times. The neighborhood changed too. The neighbors who had once whispered and judged now smiled and greeted each other warmly. Children played in the streets, and the older residents gathered in the park to share stories and laughter. It was a community reborn from a difficult time. One day the neighborhood held a small gathering in the park. Everyone brought food, drinks, and music. It was a celebration of peace and friendship. John and Karen both attended, standing a little apart but smiling as they watched the children play and neighbors talk at one point. Karen approached John with a small wrapped box. "For you," she said quietly. John accepted it with surprise. Inside was a small handmade planter with colorful flowers. "Thank you," he said, touched by the thoughtful gift. Karen smiled shyly. "I hope this is a new beginning." John felt a warmth in his heart, realized that despite all the hard times, there was hope for friendship and understanding. That night, John sat on his porch, looking up at the stars. He thought about the journey he had been on from anger and fear to peace and hope. He knew life would always bring challenges, but he felt ready to face them with an open heart. John understood that sometimes people hurt each other without meaning to. Sometimes fear and anger cloud their minds. But with patience, forgiveness, and kindness, those wounds can heal. He looked forward to the days ahead, where the neighborhood would continue to grow stronger together. The fire that once threatened to destroy their peace had become a story of learning and healing. John smiled softly and whispered to the night, "Peace begins with a choice." As the gentle breeze carried his words away, the quiet neighborhood rested, ready for a new day filled with hope, friendship, and calm.